Page 70 in the round wheel. Let's stand as we sing, if you're able to.
Are you singing? Guys, try to squish together as much as possible. Move mom up.
Nancy, can you move your chair forward, please? We're going to scoot together a little bit. There's also cards at the back to sign. Please make sure you sign those as well, even if you don't know the people. The announcements for the officers for the coming year. Nancy Rankin is the presiding officer, Dan McGowan, vice president, Chondra Rankin, treasurer, Phoebe Downing, secretary, Lauren McNair, corresponding secretary, Robert Cromba, and Barb Gensley, our other board members. We also needed to take account for the noon meal, so we can let you know how many to expect. So if you're planning on staying for lunch, please raise your hand nice and high. And Dan can be counted on this side, Jim on this side. And we'll add them together. Thank you, Dan. Okay, so we had a couple of different challenges going on this week. I'm going to start with talking a little bit about Jay. Several of us, without realizing it, several of us reached out to members of the Flag Center's church trying to find dirt on Jay. Well, we all ended up with the same dirt. It's not really dirt, but it's the worst thing we could come up with, was that he hated condiments. And we weren't really sure why. So the challenge was to ask him throughout the week and see if we could find out why he eats condiments, especially mayonnaise. Well, the winner of this challenge is Emily Reese. This is what she wrote. In high school, he worked at Taco Bell. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And when you work fast food, if you've ever worked fast food, oftentimes there are big guns full of condiments that shoot out, and the big globs would gross them out. Is that accurate?
That's pretty accurate.
Yeah, I can relate to that. And so the prize, I thought it should have been a Taco Bell gift card, but we had a McDonald's gift card. So this is the gift card for winning that challenge. Was a jelly bean challenge. There's a jar of jelly beans in the back of the church, and people were supposed to put in guesses as to how many jelly beans there were. But in giving directions for jelly bean count, we did announce to not use electronic devices to figure out the answer. There were 4 people within 5 jelly beans. So we're going to split 4 ways between those 4 people. At first we thought maybe they had seen Gavin's answer because Gavin was the one that counted them. And the total was 1,667. Two of them wrote 1,666. So they were within 1, but there were 4 people within 5. And so we decided we're going to split it 4 ways. And next year we're going to announce that no electronic devices are to be used when trying to figure out how many things are in the jar. Well, at first we thought they cheated, but I'm glad they didn't. So those 4 are David and Ed will have them split into 4 ways. We'll do that later. David Hauber, Megan Hauber, Mason Altenhofen, and Kenneth X. Rankin. So you 4 are each going to take home a 4th of the jelly beans. Yay, I got half of them at my house.
Volunteers after lunch to help do the tables and things, and we also need some volunteers to mop the floor.
Yes.
So we need to pitch in and help that way.
Exactly. More people help, the less time it takes. And also holding up puppet boxes and stuff like that. We can use some young people to help with that. Okay, next let's go ahead and turn our brown book again to page 66. prayer requests you'd like to share or praises?
I think we all need to pray for these people who filed in this and in our own community.
Yes, definitely.
Wholeheartedly pray.
Mhm.
One from Denver. Brooklyn, one from, I want to say New Hampshire, but that's Peggy Dubs.
Yes.
That's great.
Yeah, I think we're gonna have people pray for my nephew Landon, who's got leukemia, and he's gonna be 35 on August 28th.
So Landon has leukemia.
Yeah.
Prayers for all of those traveling home after conference that will all be.
I want to praise God for Shelley making it here, because she was down to Irish Fest last night. So for her to make it up this morning, I'm very glad. Thank God for the rain.
Thank God for the rain. I praise God for the young people that we've had all week. We've had a good time and we've learned a lot.
Lori Wilt was not feeling well this morning, so she wanted to pass that along, and she was sad that she couldn't make it to the last day of conference, so be with her.
So we're going to go ahead and take the tithes and offerings at this point. I would like to ask Kelly, Dan, and Paul to come forward to take the offering. Let us bow. Dear Father, thank you for these tithes and offerings that we've received. Please be with us as we travel home from conference today. Let us have safe travels. Be with the many people that were mentioned this morning, plus all the many others that need you at this time. Thank you for the beautiful day and the blessings you bestow upon us. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Alright, so at this time, I'm going to go ahead and turn things over to our guest speaker, who we've enjoyed having this week, Jay Smith.
Thank you, birthday girl. Well, this is it. This is my last opportunity to stand before you. So, once again, I want to thank you for the opportunity to be here. You have been extremely gracious hosts. I have enjoyed myself in ways I can't even begin to describe here. The accommodations were great. The food was great. The company has been wonderful. And you should be patting yourselves on the back. Well, give yourselves a round of applause. And that one's for you. I won't tell anybody that I got that one. So thank you very much. This has been a great time. One thing I've heard several times from people standing up here, they've been talking about how well behaved the kids are, and from what I've seen, the kids aren't the ones you need to worry about. Am I right, kids? Some of the adults got out of hand a little bit. Yeah, so I think you need to be a little more concerned about yourselves out there than these young people. These are some great young people, and I've had fun with them as well. So thank you. If there's one thing I can take away, one word to describe what I'm taking away, I think that word would be friends. And so if you are on social media, if you're on Facebook or Instagram, Twitter, any of those things, come find me. I would love to stay in touch and see some of the things that are going on in your lives, and just keep in touch the best that we could, because you become like family. This has been a lot of fun. Something else that I wanted to say before we begin. This doesn't have anything to do with our message this morning. You picked on me enough about my fear of condiments. I'm sure I'm not the only person that has an irrational fear of something. So somebody else out there, tell me something silly that you are afraid of. It doesn't have to be silly, but what are you afraid of? Let's just hear what somebody else is afraid of.
Wasps.
Wasps? Okay.
They don't agree with me.
Yes, they're not very agreeable little critters, are they? So, okay. Somebody else?
Snake.
What's that?
Snake.
Snakes? All right. Anybody else?
Heights.
Heights? Yeah. Yeah, there's another good one. How about somebody else?
Bats.
Bats? Okay.
Clowns.
Clowns? I thought you said almonds.
No.
Almonds? Keep the almond joys away from me, please. Okay. Clowns. All right. I've never understood that one, but then see, you don't understand my fear of condiments. So there we go. We're all unique in some way. We've all got our own little quirks and individual little things that make us different. And I think that's great. I think that's the way God made us. He made us all different. And some of us are the brains of the group. Some of us are the laughs of the group. Some of us just keep us in our place and make sure we don't get too crazy. And so God's made us all unique in different ways. And I really appreciate that about God. And some of you are extremely unique. So that was a compliment. That was a compliment now. All right, let's have a word here. Father in heaven, I am just thankful for this group right here. I'm thankful for these people and the joy that they are, the joy that they've been to me all these past few days. And I just pray your blessing on them. I just pray that your spirit fill this place right now, that you be present with us, that this time would be a time that blesses you, but a time also that we get to look into your word and understand exactly who you are a little bit more clearly and what it is you want from us out of our lives. Father, our desire is to glorify you in our praise and in our worship, but also in the lives that we live. The life that we live, we want to just shine for you and for the sake of your Son and coming kingdom. So we are looking to your word now for help in understanding how we can do that better. And we are praying these things. We are offering our prayers up to you in the name of Jesus and your Son. Amen. I want to talk to you this morning about comebacks. Now, I'm not talking about those witty things you respond with when somebody has been teasing you. That's a different kind of comeback. We'll save a sermon for that, for those types of comebacks for another time. The type of comebacks that I'm talking about are those where a person or maybe a team or a company or even a nation is so far down. They face such incredible hardships and difficulties and problems and issues that people essentially write them off. They say that they are hopeless. And yet somehow God intervenes and miraculously they come back. Now let me give you a couple of examples of what I'm talking about. Local boy Kurt Warner graduated from Northern Iowa University in 1994 as a star quarterback. And all he wanted was to play in the NFL. That's all he wanted. But nobody drafted him. So he signed on as a free agent with the Green Bay Packers. But they let him go before the season started. So Kurt Warner came back here to Iowa and took a job bagging groceries at a grocery store for $5.50 an hour. And then he played what's called arena football. And he did arena football and did pretty good at it. He made a couple $100 a game, but it certainly wasn't the professional league that he wanted to be a part of. And he did well enough that the Chicago Bears, a couple years later, decided to invite him up to their training camp. But before he ever got up there, he was injured. And so he never made it up there. So it looked like his chances at a professional football career were over. He went back and played arena football a little bit more, and then the St. Louis Rams took notice of him. And they asked Kurt if he wanted to go over and play on their European team in Amsterdam. And so this seemed like a good enough opportunity for him, so he went over to Amsterdam to play. But he didn't get much of a chance to play there because St. Louis Rams called him back to be their backup quarterback here in the States. So all of a sudden he is an NFL professional football player, although he's backup quarterback, which means he's going to spend a lot of time on the bench. Except that before the season started, the starting quarterback was injured. And all of a sudden, Kurt Warner's in the spotlight as the starting quarterback for the St. Louis Rams. Now, he went out in his first game. His very first game as a professional football player and threw 3 touchdown passes. He went out in his second game, and he threw 3 touchdown passes. He went out in his third game and threw 3 touchdown passes. And no rookie quarterback had ever done anything like that before. And to show people that he was serious, he went out into his fourth game and threw 5 touchdown passes. Kurt Warner went on to lead the St. Louis Rams to the Super Bowl that year, where they won. He was named the MVP of the Super Bowl. That year, he was also named the National Football League's Walter Payton Man of the Year for his efforts on the field and off the field in the community. Now, immediately after the Super Bowl, when he's still on the field and the cameras are still on him, a reporter comes up to Kurt Warner, and this is what he said. He said, "Kurt, first things first. Tell me about that final touchdown pass to Isaac." And on national TV in front of millions, this is what Kurt said. "Well, first things first, I've got to thank my Lord and Savior up above. Thank you, Jesus." You see, Kurt Warner had an amazing comeback, and he knew exactly who had given it to him. Now, if I were to ask you who the greatest American president who ever lived was, some of you might say Abraham Lincoln. And that would be a great answer. Abraham Lincoln was a fantastic president of the United States. But he didn't start off that way. He grew up under very meager and poor circumstances. He failed at business twice. He had what many believe was a nervous breakdown. He ran for Congress and lost. He ran for the Senate and lost. He ran for the Senate again and lost. He ran as Vice President of the United States and lost. And you would think right about there he'd be all washed up. But then, all of a sudden, Abraham Lincoln gets voted in as the 16th President of the United States. And he leads our country through one of the greatest moral and military crises that we have ever faced. Of course, he lost his life because of his efforts. At one point, Abraham Lincoln wrote this. He wrote, "Nevertheless, amid the greatest difficulties of my administration, when I could not see any other resort, I would place my whole reliance on God, knowing that all would go well and that He would decide for the right." You see, Abraham Lincoln had a big comeback, and he knew who was responsible, who had given him his big comeback. Sometimes life is full of so many amazing events and things that others might say a string of coincidences that it can be called nothing else but miraculous. And the Bible is full of miraculous comebacks. I mean, we've got the story of of Job, we've got the story of Jonah, we've got Ruth, we've got Samson, we've got Peter when he denied Christ 3 times. And after that, all these people had these incredible, amazing comebacks. In fact, if you read the Bible from cover to cover, you'll begin to discover that God is a God of comebacks. That He is a God of taking those who are broken, those who are facing difficult circumstances or hardships, those who are beaten down, and He restores them. He restores them. We can't even talk about Jesus without saying that He came back from the dead. God is a God of big comeback. One of the most compelling comeback stories in all of Scripture, one of my favorite characters in all of Scripture, is the story of Joseph that we find in the Old Testament. We're going to spend some time this morning looking at Joseph and his comeback story. So if you have your Bible and you want to follow along, we're going to be taking a brief overview of Joseph's life, but we're going to start in chapter 37. We're going to begin at verse 37, chapter 37, verse 1. We're going to start off with the first 8 verses.
Where are you at?
Genesis 37.
Genesis?
Genesis, yes. Genesis 37. And let's just start at verse 2, where it says, "This is the account of Jacob. Joseph, a young man of 17, was tending the flocks with his brothers and sons of Bilhah, the sons of Zilpah, his father's wives, and he brought their father a bad report about them. Now Israel loved Joseph more than any of his other sons, because he had been born to him in his old age, and he made a richly ornamented robe for him. When his brothers saw that their father loved him more than any of them, they hated him and could not speak a kind word to him. Joseph had a dream, and when he told it to his brothers, they hated him all the more. He said to them, 'Listen to this dream I had. We were binding sheaves of grain out of the field when suddenly my sheaf rose up and stood upright, while your sheaves gathered around mine and bowed down to it.' His brother said to him, 'Do you intend to reign over us? Will you actually rule us?' And they hated him all the more because of his dream and what he had said." Now, if we go on, we find that Joseph actually had 2 dreams that he explained to his brothers, and they were both very similar. And if you know anything about the story of Joseph, then you know that later in life, God gives him the ability to interpret dreams. And we'll get to that in a little bit. But God gives him the ability to interpret dreams. But I do not believe that Joseph had that ability right here. I don't believe he had developed that ability yet. He was only a boy of 17, so I think he did what a lot of us do when we have a strange dream. We tell somebody about it. "Oh, you'll never believe this dream that I had last night. It was so strange. It was so weird." Just a little side note here. I have this incredibly strange reoccurring dream. Does anybody remember Meg Ryan, that lovable actress of all the 80s romantic comedies? Now, I have this reoccurring dream where Meg Ryan is 50 foot tall, and she is chasing me through a mall trying to step on me. And in the end, we're sitting down and we're eating salad together. And I have no idea what this dream means. It probably means nothing, but I've had it several times. And so I've told people that I've had this weird dream about Meg Ryan, and then people just usually give me a strange look. They always do, but that's neither here nor there. But I think that's what Joseph did. I think he shared this strange dream. So when we get down to verse 28, let's go with verse 26 through 28. So when we get to this point, verse 26 says, "Judah said to his brothers, 'What will we gain if we kill our brother and cover up his blood? Come, let's sell him to the Ishmaelites and not lay our hands on him. After all, he is our brother, our own flesh and blood.' His brothers agreed. So when the Midianite merchants came by, his brothers pulled Joseph up out of the cistern and sold him for 20 shekels of silver to the Ishmaelites, who took him to Egypt." Now, I've read enough books and I've seen enough movies about slave trading to know that this was not a happy sight right here. This was not a pleasant thing to witness. I believe Joseph was screaming. I believe he was crying. I believe he was begging his brothers for mercy because he just simply did not know what was going on. He didn't understand why they would sell him off into slavery. But they did. And so the Ishmaelites take Joseph and carry him off to Egypt. And then we get over to chapter 39. Now, before we go to chapter 39, we're going to look at the first verse. The story of Joseph is around 13 chapters long. It's a long story. It's full of all kinds of details. It is full of all kinds of different characters. And it's a great story. We certainly don't have time to read all of it this morning, but I encourage you to go back and read the story of Joseph. It is incredibly fascinating. But when we get to chapter 39 in the first verse, it says, "Now Joseph had been taken down to Egypt. Potiphar, an Egyptian who was one of Pharaoh's officials, the captain of the guard, brought him from the Ishmaelites who had taken him there." Now, we don't know much about Potiphar. This is the only thing we know about Potiphar. It says he was the captain of the guard, and that may have been he was the captain of the entire Egyptian army, or it could have meant that he was just oversaw the guards that were part of the palace and kept watch over the king. We really don't know. But what we do know is that Potiphar was wealthy enough that he had slaves. He had slaves, and Potiphar bought Joseph, and Joseph became one of his slaves. So then we get down to verses 2 through 6, chapter 39. And it said, "The Lord was with Joseph, and he prospered, and he lived in the house of his Egyptian master. When his master saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord gave him access in everything he did, Joseph found favor in his eyes and became his attendant. Potiphar put him in charge of his household, and he entrusted to his care everything he owned. From the time he put him in charge of his household, all that he owned, the Lord blessed the household of the Egyptian because of Joseph. The blessing of the Lord was on everything Potiphar had, both in the house and in the field. So he left in Joseph's care everything he had. With Joseph in charge, he did not concern himself with anything except the food he ate. Now, Joseph was well built and handsome." Joseph was well built and handsome. And I'll tell you, I'd do anything to be described like that. You know, I would love for somebody to say he's well built and handsome. Most of the time I get, well, he's chubby and meh. But once again, it is what it is. Joseph is well built and handsome. And that gets him into trouble. Things were starting to look good for Joseph. He's doing okay in Potiphar's house, but he's well built and handsome. And look what happens in verse 7. "And after a while, his master's wife took notice of Joseph and said, 'Come to bed with me.'" Uh-oh. The boss's wife has got his eyes on Joseph. Or her eyes on Joseph, I should say. The boss's wife has her eyes on Joseph. And she is turning on her womanly charms, and she's chasing after him day after day. Let's see what it says here in verses 8 through 10. "But he refused. With me in charge, he told her, 'My master does not concern himself with anything in his house. Everything he owns, he has entrusted to my care. No one is greater in this house than I am. My master has withheld nothing from me except you, because you are his wife. How then could I do such a wicked thing and sin against God?' And though she spoke to Joseph day after day, he refused her." She wouldn't let up. And it has been said that hell hath no fury like a woman scorned. And this is certainly the case with Joseph, because Potiphar's wife hatches a plan to frame Joseph for attempted rape. And Potiphar comes home and she lies to Potiphar. And what does Potiphar do? He throws Joseph into prison. So Joseph goes from favorite son to slave, from slave to prisoner. point, he's got to be thinking to himself, life isn't fair. This just isn't fair. This isn't right. Well, I've done nothing wrong. And we all can relate to that because we have those moments too where we scream out and say, this isn't fair. Life is not fair. I haven't done anything to deserve this. We can relate to what Joseph is saying. If we can't relate to his circumstances, we can certainly relate to, the experience of life not being fair to us. We've all been there. Now, remember when I mentioned to you about Joseph's abilities to interpret dreams? Two of Pharaoh's servants, the cupbearer and the baker, were thrown into prison with Joseph. Pharaoh threw them into prison. Pharaohs and kings, they can be fickle sometimes. They're moody characters. And so Pharaoh throws the cupbearer and the baker into prison with Joseph. And interestingly enough, they both, the cupbearer and the baker, had a dream. And they each had a dream on the same night. Now, this was no coincidence. But they each had a dream on the same night, a troubling dream. And when they told Joseph about their dreams, Joseph's ability to interpret dreams kicks in. He told the cupbearer that he was going to return to his old position at Pharaoh's side in 3 days. He told the baker that in 3 days he was going to die. And then he asked for help. Turn over to chapter 40. Verses 14 and 15. This is what Joseph says to the cupbearer. But when all goes well with you, remember me and show me kindness. Mention me to Pharaoh and get me out of this prison, for I was forcibly carried off from the land of the Hebrews, and even here I have done nothing to deserve being put in a dungeon. So when you are restored in 3 days to your rightful position as the cupbearer of Pharaoh, remember me. Don't forget what I have done for you, what I have told you, what I have interpreted for you. Just don't forget to mention me to Pharaoh. But what does the last verse of chapter 40 say? Verse 23. The chief cupbearer, however, did not remember Joseph. He forgot him. That was just his luck. That was just his luck. Poor old Joseph. And Joseph spent the next 2 years in prison for a crime he didn't commit. Then Pharaoh had a night of dreams. He had 2 dreams, and the dreams were very similar. And once again, this was no coincidence. It was no coincidence that Pharaoh had 2 dreams that were very much alike on the same night. Look at 41 verses 33 through 40. So, Pharaoh has these dreams he can't figure out. He calls in all of his magicians, his sorcerers, his wise men. They can't interpret the dream. He's troubled by the dream. And then the cupbearer remembers Joseph and says, hey, Pharaoh, I remember this guy, this young guy in prison who interpreted my dreams. And Pharaoh calls for Joseph. And Joseph steps in. He's brought before Pharaoh, and he interprets Pharaoh's dream. 41:33. This is what Joseph says to Pharaoh. And now let Pharaoh look for a discerning and wise man and put him in charge of the land of Egypt. Let Pharaoh appoint commissioners over the land to take 1/5 of the harvest of Egypt during the 7 years of abundance. They should collect all the food of these good years that are coming and store up the grain under the authority of Pharaoh to be kept in the cities for food. This food should be held in reserve for the country to be used during the 7 years of famine that will come upon Egypt, so that the country may not be ruined by the famine. The plan seemed good to Pharaoh and to all the officials. So Pharaoh asked them, can we find anyone like this man, one in whom is the Spirit of God? Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, since God has made all this known to you, there is no one as discerning and wise as you. You shall be in charge of my palace, and all my people are to submit to your orders. Only with respect to the throne will I be greater than you. From favorite son to slave to prisoner to the second highest position in all of Egypt, Joseph had made a comeback. Joseph had a comeback. And he knew exactly who had given him. Genesis 46 says that Joseph was 30 years old. So he had spent about 13 years in hardship before he finally interpreted Pharaoh's dreams and was given the second highest position in the land. And if that was the end of the story, that would be a great ending, to see Joseph sitting as the second most important person in all of Egypt. But that is not the end of the story for Joseph. You see, when God gives comebacks, he gives big comebacks. There's another chapter to Joseph's story. You see, Joseph's brothers come to town. The famine had spread beyond Egypt and into the land where Joseph's father and brothers lived. And so Joseph's brothers come to Egypt looking to buy grain. And in chapter 42, we see that Joseph recognizes his brothers. He recognizes who his brothers are when they come before him to buy grain, but they don't recognize who he is. Remember, 13 years have passed. He's living in a new society now. He looks different. He's mature. He's probably got different jewelry, different clothing than what his brothers are used to. So they don't recognize Joseph. But he recognizes them. And he remembers his dream. He remembers those sheaves bowing down to his sheep. He finally reveals himself to his brothers after playing a little bit of mind games with them. And that's part of the fun of this story. It's the way that Joseph plays games with them for a little bit. But he finally reveals to them who he is in chapter 45. And I'm going to read just the first 7 verses of 45, because for me this is just an incredibly powerful, emotional portion of Scripture. 45, the first 7 verses. And it says, then Joseph could no longer control himself before all his attendants, and he cried out, have everyone leave my presence. So there was no one there with Joseph when he made himself known to his brothers. And he wept so loudly that the Egyptians heard him, and Pharaoh's household heard about it. Joseph said to his brothers, I am Joseph. Is my father still living? But his brothers were not able to answer him because they were terrified at his presence. Then Joseph said to his brothers, come close to me. When they had done so, he said, I am your brother Joseph, the one you sold into Egypt. And now do not be dismayed, and do not be angry with yourselves for selling me here, because it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you. For 2 years now there has been famine in the land, and for the next 5 years there will be no plowing and no reaping. But God sent me ahead of you to preserve for you a remnant on earth, and to save your lives by a great deliverance. See, Joseph knew who gave him this comeback. Joseph had a big comeback, and he knew it came directly from God. It's easy to look at the Bible and look at some of these stories and think, well, comebacks only come for people in the Bible. That kind of thing happened back then. Or it only occurs with special people who have special gifts like the ability to throw a football or the ability to be the president of the United States. And if that's what you're thinking, I'm going to tell you this morning that you are wrong. That God gives comebacks to everyday people just like you and me living everyday lives. Now, how do I know that? If you'll indulge me for just a minute, I will explain. When I was a boy, my mother babysat other children in our home to raise money to help support our family. I have 2 younger brothers, so 3 growing boys, it takes a little bit to feed those. It was expensive. And so she watched other children, and when I was about 12 years old, she was watching this little, around 3 or 4-year-old redheaded girl. And she was just the most adorable little thing imaginable, with long curly red hair and freckles across her nose. Probably the kind of redheaded girl that Charlie Brown always talks about. And for some strange reason, this little girl loved me. And when I would come home from school, we'd sit down together, she'd crawl up in my lap, and we'd eat a snack together, and we'd watch cartoons. And I knew right there in that moment that the thing I wanted most out of life was to be a father and a husband. I knew then that is what I wanted most out of life. Now we move forward a few years later, and I go off to Bible college. And people will say that there's no such thing as love at first sight. But the very first time I saw my wife, I knew that I was going to have a future with her. And the interesting thing is I didn't even see the front side. I just saw the back side. And somehow I knew, I just had this feeling, well, that's who God wants me to spend my life with. I hope she's, good looking on the other side. Turns out she was, nothing bad at all. And so we went through some premarital counseling, and we agreed then that we wanted to have children. We wanted, several children in our lives. We wanted to be parents. We both came from very close families that were very much alike, and we wanted to continue that way. But when it came time for us to start our family, nothing happened. And we continued trying, and still nothing happened. And the friends around us that we were close with began to have children of their own. And we were happy, but we were a little disappointed that we weren't having children as well. And so we had some medical testing done, and the medical tests all came back inconclusive. There was no reason really why we shouldn't be having children. It just wasn't happening. And so time went on, and we considered tests and some other procedures, but they were all expensive, and our insurance didn't cover anything like that. So we just sort of continued with this growing ache and this growing hole in our hearts. And time went on, and we talked about it some, but most of the time we didn't talk about it because it kind of hurt too much to talk about. And the hole got bigger, the ache got stronger, and I began to despise Christmas because it is such a young people's holiday with the programs and the gifts and all the great things having to do with children. And so I began to despise Christmas and all the invitations we get to go to the church Christmas programs and that kind of thing. Things got tough. I began to develop a depression, and because of that, I left my chosen profession of being a pastor. I didn't feel I was doing the job properly, and so I left that, and we tried carrying on. You've already heard that I spent a little bit of time as a stand-up comic, and enjoyed that. And at one point, I decided, well, I'm going to go out to Hollywood and try acting. And so I did. I went out to Hollywood for a while, and I tried the acting thing, and I was starting to do fairly well. People were getting to know who I was. I was getting some great auditions for shows like Law and Order and CSI, and then I developed some eye problems, and I came back home to have eye surgery, and I had a doctor essentially botch up my eye surgery, and so now I have, you probably noticed, a bit of a droopy eye, and that kind of thing doesn't look good on camera. And it affected my vision overall, so I gave that up as well. And we kept plugging along, and then we talked earlier about the brown recluse, and that led to a number of painful foot surgeries over the years, and I developed an addiction to painkillers, and all these things kept going on, and it began to take a toll on our marriage. But somehow we struggled through. And by this time, all of those friends that we had who were having children were now beginning to have grandchildren. And it was then that we realized that for the rest of our lives, we would have to deal with that hole and that emptiness and that aching. It is amazing what can turn your life around in a hurry. For Joseph, it was a meeting with Pharaoh and just the interpretation of a dream. For us, it was a phone call. We were moving. We were literally unloading boxes from a truck, moving them into the house we live in now, when we received a phone call. And the phone call came from a friend of ours who always believed that we would one day be parents, who always prayed that we would one day be parents. And she had run into somebody else who knew somebody else, and what happened was she gave us a call and said, I don't know how to ask this, but to come out and ask it. Would you be interested in adopting a baby? Now, we weren't on any lists. We weren't looking to adopt. We had not talked to adoption agencies or anything along those lines. This call came completely out of the blue for us. And we immediately said yes. There was no reason to discuss it. There was no reason to talk about it. And 3 weeks before our 29th wedding anniversary, my son Castle was born. And we were there in the hospital when he was born. My wife was there in the delivery room. She got to cut the umbilical cord. And she got to be the very first one to hold him. And so we brought our son home from the hospital. This past Tuesday, he turned 4 years old. It was a day of celebration in our home. It was a day of praising God. He had given us a comeback, a miraculous comeback. And we knew it came from him. Like Joseph's story, there were a lot of details and characters involved that I can't go into right now because it would make the story way too long. But if that was the end of the story, I would be a happy man. I would be a completely happy man with my son and my wife, but that's not the case. You see, when God gives comebacks, he gives big comebacks. So 2 years later, we get another phone call from the birth mother who was pregnant by the same man. And she wanted us to adopt a second child as well. And we did. And both of our boys were born about an hour and a half away from us. And yet, miraculously, we were able to be in the hospital at the time they were born. And once again, my wife was in the delivery room when my second son, Casey, was born. And she was able to hold him. And we were able to bring both of our boys home from the hospital. And in October, Casey will be 2 years old. God gave us a big comeback. God is a God of comebacks. That's why I share my story with you. Some of you have comeback stories of your own. Some of you have faced circumstances that were dark, that were miserable, that were horrifying. In Psalm 40 it says, David wrote, I waited patiently for the Lord. He inclined and heard my cry. He lifted me up out of the pit, out of the muck and mire, and set my feet on a strong stone. Some of you have been in that pit. Some of you have been in the muck and the mire, sinking down, thinking that there was no hope at all, and yet God gave you a miraculous comeback. Your comeback story needs to be told. Your comeback story is your witness. It is your witness to the power and abilities of our mighty God. Your circumstances may not be the same kind of circumstances that Joseph's were or mine. They may not be worthy of a chapter in the Bible, but they are still a testament to the powers of God. Your story needs to be told. Among your church friends who sometimes struggle in their faith, among those you work with, or those in your community, or those in your social groups who do not know God, you need to share your comeback stories. You need to inspire others. Some of you are in need of a comeback story. Some of you are in that dark place right now, and you're wondering if there is any hope. You may be wondering why you're sitting here this morning. You may be questioning everything there is to question about life, about God. You need to come back to your own. In John 16:33 it says, in this life you will have trouble. Life isn't fair. We all know that. We all face dark times. But you need to know, if you are in need of a comeback, you are not alone. You need to know that there is hope. You need to know that God is waiting to listen and to hear you, and that your brothers and sisters are waiting to hold you and help you. Don't be afraid to ask for help. We mentioned this the other night. Don't let pride stand in the way of your miracle. Another thing you need to do is maintain your integrity. Joseph maintained his integrity at all times. That's the reason his comeback was so big. Joseph maintained his integrity. And that's something you need to do as well if you're struggling. Maintain your integrity. Hold on to your values. Don't compromise your standards. Take some time to read your Bible. If you can't figure out what to read, I think I mentioned this the other night, just open up to the book of Psalms and read a verse out of Psalms. Just start right there with one verse. Pray to God. You don't know what to pray, then you just say, God, I don't know what to say right now. I need to come back. I'm right here. I'm just going to listen. I'm just going to sit quietly and listen. Listen to the comeback stories of others. Listen to the comeback stories of others in your church. Read comeback stories from the Bible, other biographies. Listen to comeback stories on tape or video or movies, whatever the case may be. Read Chicken Soup for yourself, for the soul. Read that. Just listen to the comeback stories of others to be reminded that God is a God of comebacks. If you need to come back and you don't know where to begin, I want to invite you this morning, after the service, to come right over here. Paul and I are going to be up here, and if you are in need of a comeback and you don't know where to begin, or whatever the case may be, come on up here. We will gladly pray with you. We'd love to pray with you and just ask God to bless you and help you to begin your journey on the way to a comeback. God is a God of comebacks. God is a God of miracles. I know that. I believe that. What does this sign say right up here?
I believe in miracles.
I believe in miracles. I believe in miracles. Why? Because we serve a God of
Let's turn in our Greek hymnals this time to number 311. Number 311. Those Beautiful Days, written by A.J. Eichner, who was one of the really important early Church of God ministers for the Church of God in Iowa. Let's stand as we sing and remain standing while Jay closes with prayer.
We know that you are in control, that you are in charge, and that you are a loving God who gives miracles. You still perform miracles today for your children. You provide comebacks for those who are hurting and those who are facing dark circumstances and difficult circumstances. And we know that you are a God of restoration, a God that can lift us up out of any pit and make us a light for you and for your coming kingdom. And so as we prepare for our last meal together at this conference, I just pray for your spirit once again to stay and remain with us as we fellowship and enjoy each other's company. I ask a special blessing on all these people. Father, just give them your spirit and as we leave this place, give them safety in their journey home and bless them as they bless you with their lives and the way that they live for you. I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.